I started using drugs when I was about 13 years old. I went from alcohol to marijuana. My mother was dying of cancer, and I would reach over her and take her medication.
And I got addicted to drugs by a friend, a so-called friend. I thought she was my friend. She had introduced me to cocaine on my birthday.
I was very uncomfortable in my own skin, and I really didn't know what to do with that attention. Until I was 15, I was in my uncle's medicine cabinet and I found Percocet, and I took it and I felt so comfortable.
I had chronic pain my whole life.
The chances of dying in a vehicle crash is 1 out of 103. The chances of dying from an opioid overdose, 1 out of 96. That means you are more likely to die from opioid abuse than in a car accident. What has America done to support those suffering from addiction? Not enough. We've denied them access to affordable treatment, blamed them for actions outside of their control, and labeled them as criminals. This cannot continue for any longer. That's why it's our mission to educate the public on the effect of opioids and the reason we created this documentary. Throughout this entire process, we've learned that addiction isn't a choice, it's a disease. We found that no matter your race, religion, gender identity, socioeconomic status, or genetic history, you are susceptible to an opioid addiction. Addiction does not discriminate.
The latest opioid crisis came out of prescription drug abuse. Some of the pharmaceutical companies had big sales pitches to doctors, but doctors get a very small amount of time training on how to prescribe.
Anyone is susceptible to addiction, and people use opioids for different reasons. While overprescribing opioids is a big part of the problem, sometimes former users have past behaviors or traumatic experiences that they believe led to their addiction.
Coming up as a little girl, I always struggled with abandonment and rejection issues. Well, I was molested by my dad when I was 6 years old. And that's where the abandonment and rejection comes in. And so when I got to high school, I had very low self-esteem. I didn't believe in myself. And I was always rejected.
The only thing is, I knew even when I was younger that I was different. I often would act out and look for behavior, or look for my behavior to be rewarded, even if it was negative behavior. I started to get really overweight at age 7, and so I would hide in the bathroom and eat candy and hide the wrappers in the garbage, and that was my first feelings of shame and guilt.
In order for me to go to work and make money and to pay my rent, to put food in my mouth, I had to take an oxycodone to go to work.
Well, let's say that you take something that you makes everything go away, makes all your problems. My mother was dying, makes all your problems go away, and so you take it and you have no problems, and then it wears off and your problems come back, and you say, well, why not take it again and make my problems go away? And that's how I lived my whole teenage years.
These behaviors are not the only changes from addiction. Addiction has tremendous effects internally, especially on the development of the brain.
Addiction affects the brain in that it alters neural pathways. So essentially, when you start using a substance, it can shut down areas of the brain that are normally functioning, and literally creates new neural pathways in the brain that when somebody is recovering from addiction, they have to then shut down and re-engage the neural pathways that are normal functioning.
Long-term treatment is essential to combating addiction. Only 1 in 5 people who need treatment for drug use actually receive care. Addiction is not a choice, it's a disease. Because it rewires the brain, willpower alone is not enough to prevent relapse. It is incredibly difficult for someone to treat it alone. Everyone's experience with addiction is different.
Before you put a pill in your mouth, think about having the flu 10 times worse, okay? You feel like you have a million bugs crawling in your body. I was up for 7 days straight, okay? Vomiting, everything, you name it. I would never put my body through that ever again.
Now somehow in a blackout, went back to the house that I grew up in Newark, climbed in the window, got into the bed. There was a lady sleeping in the bed. I tried to get out of the house, and these guys were hitting me. When I got out of the house, there was a car running. I jumped in the car. I pulled out in the car, and I wound up running into a police car. And I was arrested, and I did not know what I had done until a lawyer came to see me.
Eventually I just reached a point where I couldn't even, go run to the store for an errand without being high on some kind of opioids.
I wanted to stop for a very long time, but I just didn't know how to stop. And one day I just got really fed up. It's a shame when you get to where the crack houses don't want you no more.
Many people who battle with opioid addiction experience stigma that discourages them from reaching out for help. In 2017 alone, there were 47,600 deaths from opioid overdoses. Many of these could have been prevented if there was less stigma and ignorance surrounding drug abuse and people knew where to turn.
Yes, it's somebody's mother, it's somebody's best friend, it's somebody's son, and it's not always that they made bad choices. It's that the choices they made eventually overtook them, and when they reach a point where they need help, us as a society and as a community really need to start helping everyone. And if we could get that stigma away from drug abuse and realize that substance abuse is as close to a disease as we can get, and no one should be ashamed to admit that they have diabetes or that they have cancer or that they have any kind of physical disease. So I think the biggest prevention effort is letting people know that they have somewhere to turn and they have someone to talk to and that they're not going to be stigmatized.
Well, a lot of people, they all judged me. A lot of my family judged me.
And I woke up and I remember looking at my father and the upset look on my father's face. And I believe he was upset that I woke up.
Once your child has an addiction, it's not the kind of thing like you break your arm. You go to the doctor, 1, 2, 3, you put the cast on, stays on 6 weeks, it comes off, everything's fine. You have an addiction, it's not like taking off a cast.
I don't think there's any shame in having the disease of addiction. I think the shame is having the problem and not doing anything about it. At 16, 17, 18, you couldn't tell me anything. I was completely invincible and I was unstoppable and I knew better and I knew everything. Obviously I did not, but I think more education and more awareness, breaking the stigma and just more awareness would probably be the best thing to help.
Nobody wants to have a heroin addict in their families. So for a lot of people, it took them a really long time to wake up to the issue. People have some other problems in their lives, but to have a heroin addict, in my time, a heroin addict, they were at arm's length. Even the bad kids didn't do heroin. So this is not one family. This is thousands and thousands of families who have the same problem.
Addiction impacts a family's finances, physical health, and psychological well-being. Every single person in an addict's family is affected in some way by the individual's substance abuse.
The opiate issue really hit home for me myself a few years ago when my family found out that my mother was abusing opiates. And I didn't pick up these signs that I had a substance abuse issue at home to one of the people on this planet I'm closest to. And it was a real eye-opener that anyone can have an issue, and her issue started with painkillers. It started with doctors prescribing these pills to her, and then her addiction becoming more than she could handle.
My brother found me in my room in the late afternoon on a Sunday, and it was described that my lips were blue and I was unresponsive. It turned out I had overdosed on heroin in the early hours of that morning. My brother passed in July of 2016 because he was a diabetic. He was drinking and he was found under the bridge in our hometown, 31 years old, and died from the disease of alcoholism.
I have several friends whose children are addicts. One just recently, he had a son who was an addict. He went on for 5 or 6 years. He was in jail for 3 or 4 months. When he got out of jail, he was desperate. He sold a bag of what he thought was heroin. It was fentanyl, and he died with the needle in his arm.
My son was taken from me on February 5th, 2016. It was devastating and I was absolutely heartbroken, but at the same time I felt relief because I knew he would be better off with someone else that wasn't using drugs that could take better care of him.
With a stronger understanding of what addiction is and how it affects all of us, we wanted to know what comes next and what someone can do to get help.
You cannot experiment with opiates. That's the bottom line.
What finally made me change was the pain got great enough, the pain of losing my son, the pain of spending holiday after holiday in a treatment center, of having no life of my own, no freedom, being in prison in my own mind. I finally just surrendered to the idea that I can't put any mood or mind-altering substances into my body.
There should be nobody who's an addict that can't get help, long-term help.
As students, as young people, don't be afraid to reach out to a friend if you find yourself using drugs and you are scared.
Yeah, I would like to give advice to the high school students. You need to reach out. You need to reach out and let somebody know, like, look, I'm struggling with drugs.
If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction, please reach out for help. Addiction can happen to anyone. It is a disease, not a choice. Addiction can take a hold of our loved ones and change the way they act. We cannot turn away from our family, friends, classmates, neighbors, and coworkers when they need our help the most.
You don't have to do it alone.